again, and welcome to episode 2 of Snow Country for Old Men, a podcast about life in Japan's legendary Yukiguni. My name is Peter. I'm a freelance writer and guide based in Nagano, Japan. And as an introduction to episode 1, I gave a little bit of information about what this podcast is all about. So before jumping into today's interview, I felt it worth giving a little bit more information about myself. I won't go into too much of my own story for the time being, but I thought it's worth mentioning that I'm an Australian, and from a young age, I've always had an interest in traditional cultures. The older the better, really, and when such cultures are found in places of extremes, for example, deserts, jungles, mountains and snow, then I'm really captivated. With that in mind, it's not really surprising that I've ended up living and working in the snow country, a place of heavy, heavy snow and rich traditions, as a writer and a guide. If you're interested to read a little of my story, please visit our website, www.snowcountryforoldmen, and just refer to the My Story page on the website. On today's episode, I chat with Rich Morgan. Rich and his wife Maiko are restoring their home, a 200-year-old farmhouse in Togari, Nagano. Known in Japanese as kominka, a word that Rich often abbreviates to minka through the interview. These are beautiful old houses that really sustain life in the snow country, allowing families to survive the winters, acting as lifeboats or satellites in the snow when the villages and individual households might be cut off from the rest of the world. Kominka come in all shapes, forms and sizes, but according to the Japan Kominka Association, they're defined as a building built before 1950 using traditional post-beam construction methods. I believe in saying that they're referring to the traditional Japanese joinery with no nails. They are typically, or at very least very often, they have thatched roofs and provided families with both living and workspaces in which to sustain themselves through the winter. Rich and Maiko purchased their kominka in 2016 and are engaged in its ongoing restoration, or perhaps rebirth is the more suitable word. In talking about that process, Rich weaves his own story, his story and Maiko's story into the narrative of the house and its restoration, which, in hindsight, captures the essence of these houses that are living, breathing organisms that can't be separated from the stories of those that have lived in them and loved them. A point that Rich makes very eloquently to close out the interview. I should also mention that Rich refers to his wife Maiko throughout the interview. Unfortunately, Maiko couldn't join us on the day as she was a little under the weather, but the restoration of their house is just as much her story. And as Rich references, it is both their home and a test project for a company she works with called Sachiya that helps people find and restore kominka. I'll include a link to the Sachiya website in the show notes, and I hope to return to Togari in future to chat with Maiko and Rich together. We recorded the interview in the house, so you may hear some creaks and groans and scrapes from time to time, which is just really the house doing what it does in breathing. Also worth mentioning that Rich is a very easy man to speak with, and so our conversation was well underway, and I just hit the record button to begin today's interview. I could have happily sat there all morning and spoken with Rich, and as I said, I hope to return in future to continue chatting with him and Maiko together. I hope you enjoy.
You asked me earlier how you're doing, or how's Mikey doing, my wife, my lovely wife, and I said she's busy. But that you know, and I really hate myself for saying that because I can't stand it. Oh, sorry, that's too strong. It irritates me slightly when you ask somebody how they're doing and they say, I'm so busy. Because it's almost like, who gives a toss about that? You know, I it's almost like holier than thou, or I'm great, or I'm so busy. And
the word I find myself using recently is hectic.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Where does that
Chaotic.
rank?
Chaotic's good as well. Yeah.
Dramatic was my last week. Dramatic because we were all sick.
Yeah.
So
is everyone all right now?
More or less, I think.
Yeah.
I'm back to the usual form, which is somewhere below subpar.
Did you lose a bit of weight?
I hope so. What do you tell me?
Well, you're looking good. Yeah.
Thank you.
You should have food poisoning. Yeah. Just try and, go for it. But
it sounds like Mikey's out of action today. Is she?
Yeah,
she well?
I think it's either a very heavy cold or just the Kaffun show has got too much.
Yeah.
It's weird this year.
The Kaffun show being the season. Here in Japan.
Particularly from the cedar trees, and which is something that also is quite annoying.
Do you get that?
No, I don't. I've heard from a doctor friend, and he's a real doctor. He's, although what I'm going to say next might
this qualifier gives me no confidence. Well, go ahead.
Maybe he hasn't got a license because he said that perhaps wearing contact lenses makes a big difference.
It helps. Obviously.
Yeah, it helps because I feel like this at this time of year, like I can feel something in the air. Like maybe it's just me, maybe it's just but I can feel there's something going on with this because sometimes you can actually see clouds of
absolutely.
green pollen. It's incredible. It's beautiful, actually.
When I drove up here this morning, the windshield when I got in the car was just covered in that kind of yellow pollen.
That's because you live in Nagano, though. But
I do. I'm currently doing a 3-year course of meds to get rid of my allergy.
Are you really?
Yeah, a tablet every day.
It seems to be working because you don't seem
absolutely it is.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah,
that's great.
Oh, absolutely. That's why. So I'm happy to call myself an old man. Like on kind of permanently on medication now.
Right. Well, how old are you?
44.
Oh well, I'm 48. So
right.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I always forget your age. You've told me on numerous occasions. In fact, when you first introduced yourself, you said, "My name's Pete, and I'm 40 or something."
Yeah, that's how I go around.
Is that an Australian thing or?
Me? Well, possibly. I mean, I'm just happy that anyone speaks to me. So excited when the conversation begins.
Yeah.
So the reasons to start the podcast is to force people to talk to me.
Right. No, well, you don't need to force me to start talking. You know me.
I do know you. And just to introduce you to any listeners today, I'm speaking with Rich Morgan, a friend living up here in Togari, Nagano. Just to help Rich, for anyone who's not familiar with the area, where is Togari in relation to Nagano and the rest of Japan?
So Nagano Prefecture is right bang in the middle of Japan, and it's landlocked. There are I'm sure there's a number out there, but there are very few prefectures in Japan that are landlocked.
I imagine there wouldn't be many at all.
Yeah, that's right. And it's sort of northwest of Tokyo and the Kanto region, and about 4 hours by car from Tokyo on the highway. And Togari is in Iyama, which is a city. It's called a city, but it's not. There's only 20,000 people here, and it's very
confusing, isn't it?
It's rural.
Japanese use of that word.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. They love using that. Yeah. And Iyama is in the far north or northeast of Nagano Prefecture. So we're sort of an hour, as the crow flies, about an hour from the Sea of Japan. That's on the north coast of Japan, and we're about 45 minutes north of Nagano City. And Iyama is in a valley, surrounded on one side, on the western side of a very beautiful mountain range called the Sekita mountain range, which stretches 110 kilometers or about 80 miles or so from Madarao Mountain ski resort, and all the way up to Naiba, which is where Fuji Rock is held. And it's another ski resort in Niigata. 80 so miles on the west side. That's one side of Iyama. On the other side is the Shiga mountain range and Nozawa mountain range. That's on the eastern side of Iyama. So Iyama is in a valley and flanked by those two mountain ranges. So Togari is at the high end or the northern end of that valley, in the Iyama Valley, and it's very unique because first and foremost it's a very famous rice growing area, and the village itself, basically everyone who lives in the village has a rice field or is actually a licensed rice farmer, but it's also in the winter it's got quite a famous ski resort. It's very small and it's quite low lying, so some of the skiing aficionados poo-poo it and look down on it. Yeah, but actually, it's probably the best place to go on a powder day. I'm not an expert in snow sports, but it's a great day on a powder day.
And we can literally see that ski resort out the window where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, if it hadn't closed on Sunday, I could see people skiing down on the grass because there wasn't enough snow this year, so there's not much snow remaining. But yeah, we can see it from the window here.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, why are we sitting here today in Togari? Why are you here? Obviously, you're not a Togari native.
I am. No. I'm from the UK, and I had no interest, to be honest with you, in Asia and in Japan. I wasn't part of that, group of people who are interested in manga or video games or
likewise.
It's weird. I'm not going to say it's weird because there are lots of those people are my friends.
Yeah. Oh, it's fine if that's what you like.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Each to their own. But I was teaching English in England, and I in a place called Bournemouth. And it's kind of a bit of a slightly strange story, but I met my wife, who's Japanese there, my now wife. And we started dating, and literally started dating. And the next Monday, she was arrested for murder. It's a very long story. Wrongfully arrested for murder.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, she was living as a foreign student studying English in Bournemouth, and she and another girl were living with a gentleman who was murdered, unfortunately, in the apartment, and she was wrongfully arrested and kept in the police station for approximately a day.
Right.
And then the reason why I got together with my wife,
you were the one phone call, were you?
Sorry?
You were the one.
No, I don't think she even did that. Yeah. But she was released. Her reaction was one of pure delight at being, almost like crossing it off the list. Yes, I was arrested for murder. And
when she was released, she was no longer under suspicion?
No.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, that's an important point. The other lady, poor lady, was hysterical.
Sure.
But but this my wife was very quite saw it as an achievement.
Yeah.
So I was very impressed with that.
Yeah.
And then that's why I cemented the relationship, and we got together. And then I said, let's come to Japan. I don't really want to live there, but I want to see where you're from, and let's stay for a year. And then 17 years later, I'm still here. I'm in the minority that I wasn't really interested in Japan, and to be honest, the first year or so I really disliked it. I'm from a small town, rural country boy from Shrewsbury,
right?
Which is in Shropshire, very farming community, and where the men are men and the sheep are nervous. That's what we say, yeah. And so I moving to Tokyo and then to Saitama, I was also impressed how people could live there. And I love Tokyo. I love going there, but it was incredibly intense, the living conditions and the built environment.
Yeah.
I really was not happy. I love, good architecture. And when I say good architecture, I like, something that's more aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
Not brutalism.
Yeah.
And
which is something I think strikes a lot of visitors upon arriving in Japan, because in their mind they're expecting that very classic kind of Edo period architecture, which it still does exist in some areas of Japan. Most of Japan doesn't look like that.
No,
very functional.
Yeah,
very, as you said, brutalist. You'd say actually a lot of it is quite unattractive. And so I've actually found that spending time in the Japanese cities or in the Japanese more kind of urban areas, isn't that appealing to me.
Right.
And one of the reasons that I wanted to get out into areas like this was that you can actually find a much more attractive, aesthetically pleasing kind of landscape and lifestyle in these areas.
Right.
Similar motivation for yourself?
It was, yes, it was about these old houses, farmhouses so when literally the first week, 2006, January, I went up to visit Maiko's hometown, which is a place called Matsumoto, which is right in the center of Nagano. So it's really actually pretty, I think there's an area in Matsumoto which is actually officially the center of Japan.
Oh, really?
Geographically. And
Matsumoto is actually quite a nice little city.
Yeah.
It's quite pleasant.
That's right. And I went up there on my own on the bullet train to go and meet her and her family. and I started noticing these beautifully designed farmhouses, and it was so refreshing because I'd been in Tokyo and Saitama, and I was really quite upset about what I was seeing in terms of the built environment, and so it was a lovely surprise to see these houses remaining, and that's it was 2006, January. I said to Maiko, we're getting one of those. Let's aim to get one, and we really strived to and not to cut off ties with Tokai, the metropolis.
Yep.
It was more, just I want to get one of those and preserve it.
So that's a goal that you set in 2006.
Yeah.
And then you began the search for a house?
Probably the following year we began the search. Yeah. And it was nice because we did a lot of traveling into the countryside and stayed there and went to look at these houses. I mean, I love looking at property. It's really, even if you're not buying, it's really good fun.
Yeah, it's kind of addictive,
you meet lots
actually.
of nice people.
Yeah.
So,
it's done in a very different way in Japan to maybe other countries as well, right? It's far less kind of transactional, more informal, I think.
Especially in the countryside.
Yeah.
You get to know the person who's selling.
Yeah.
And also it's nice. It's a whole, holistic experience.
So that was 2006, and now we're sitting in your home today. Today being 2023.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about where we are today. When did you find this house? What was the process of actually purchasing it? And how did you make that decision about Togari? Were you specifically looking for Togari? Or?
Yeah, so Togari, Nozawa, which is 10 minutes drive away, which is, it's very famous ski resort and an onsen town, hot spring town. And we, with a group of Japanese friends, about 20 of us, we went there 2010 New Year. And had a party there and skied and and it was great. It was quite a big snow year. And the following February, so this is 2011, just 1 week before the huge earthquake, the Tohoku earthquake, we came back that weekend, just the two of us, and it was also still huge snow. And at that time there was no bullet train, and it was quite tough getting there. And then. Yeah.
Oh, so that's before the bullet train was extended. Okay.
And then we heard that the bullet train was going to be opened. The Hokuriku bullet train that goes to Kanazawa on the north coast. And Maiko's always been very good with research, and also she's always been really interested in property and real estate. So she was, maybe that's the place for the house. Our goal, our dream, and so she did a lot of research, and she found out about the bullet train. And then we came back in 2012, and it's a great time to come in here in May, because there's an amazing flower called Nanohana, and it's a yellow flower. We came and we rented bicycles at the little station at that time, because before the bullet train, and we cycled all along the river, and it was just an amazing combination. You could see it now of the greenery coming back after the winter, snow still remaining on the hills, the blue sky, the white fluffy clouds, and the green Chikuma River, the longest river in Japan, is winding through the valley, all combining with this yellow flower everywhere. It was just absolutely,
it's a magic time of year, isn't
beautiful.
It? Actually, I'm glad you've kind of mentioned that, because one thing I want to get across on this podcast is these areas are best known for their winter, for their snow, but these are really regions of 4 distinct seasons, and each season offers its own reasons to be here. I really love that time of year around May when everything is flowering and they flood the rice fields with the water, and they're like mirrors reflecting this big blue sky and all the colours. It's really fantastic, and before the weather really heats up and the humidity comes on. Magic time of year.
It is amazing. And there's so many, even when you go higher up, you can go up to Shiga Kogen at that time of year. It's just spectacular on a day like this, a clear day with a bit of remaining snow, but you can still drive up. And it's just a lovely trip up there. There's Togakushi as well, the famous ninja town and the power spot town. But that's another. I'm sure you'll talk about that on another podcast. But
yeah, it's funny because on the previous episode, I spoke with Mark from Martelao Mountain Lodge, and he described the lifestyle here as kind of like a millionaire's lifestyle, but not needing the money to have that lifestyle.
Oh, that's perfect.
And I think you just hit on
yeah.
all those things. You've got these ski resorts around you. It's just beautiful. You've got space around you.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of lifestyle that maybe if you are from the UK or in Australia, you're probably going to need a lot of money to afford that kind of lifestyle. To be honest,
yeah, this kind of area in Europe, it's going to command huge land prices, really. Yeah. And I think that's because, again, I have a really nice group of Japanese friends, so not to criticize Japanese people's mentality, but they really don't appreciate that like we do
definitely
in Europe or North America and Australia. They don't appreciate. They all want to be in the center, in the metropolis.
It's a constant conversation with my mother-in-law.
Right. Oh, there you go.
Between my wife and my mother-in-law.
Right.
So she thinks we are nuts to want this lifestyle, and they're from a very small village in Niigata.
Right.
But all she wants to do is get to the city, any city.
Yeah.
And she thinks we're crazy to even be pursuing. As I mentioned to you before, she's kind of classed us as hippies.
Right. My mother-in-law is already a bit of a hippie, so I think she was a bit more accommodating or, understanding. But again, she lives in Matsumoto, which, is quite an urban center. Yeah. It's not big, but, so she was quite surprised but also happy because we're closer. And I'm sure your mother-in-law is happy as well because you're closer.
Oh, I don't think she cares about being near me. Our little boy, she loves being near her grandson.
Right.
But personally, if I'm not around, I don't think she'd be too bothered.
Come on, you're belittling yourself. But I think that's it's it is surprise. My Japanese friends in Tokyo and my non-Japanese friends in Tokyo were surprised when we moved out. Very surprised. Yeah, they were like, "What are you doing?" In fact, they were actually. One friend took Maiko aside, came up to visit, and said, and this is before we'd done any renovation, and it was really looking rough, and and said, "You're going to be all right," like that. He was literally, and Maiko said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm worried about you guys moving up here," and I said, "Is it all Rich's decision? Is he putting pressure on you?"
Oh, really? That was
but actually, it was more Maiko that wanted to move. Yeah, to be honest, I was, but it was, but there was a lot of concern amongst our friends, and but I think now especially during Corona, they realised that was perhaps the right decision, and the timing of Corona was perfect because they were like, oh, now we had so many people coming to visit during Corona.
It's been interesting to see that change, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Because certainly if you are looking to buy property in these areas, prior to COVID, there was a lot on the market, and these properties, a lot of them would sit here literally for years, available to purchase, and suddenly you saw that change in COVID where they were getting snapped up. Certainly any decent property was disappearing. I think we're kind of through that little spike though.
Right,
I think
absolutely.
things are going back to normal.
Yeah.
When did you find the house that we're in today? Like the house that we are now sitting in, that you're renovating, when did you purchase?
Early 2016, we were shown it, and then we actually bought it in September of that year, 2016. And
was that a complicated process in terms of the purchase and negotiation to buy it?
Not really. Compared to the UK, it wasn't really any. It was just, we saw in that from 2006 to getting 10 years really. We saw about 80 properties, in mostly Nagano, I would say. Large proportion of them in Nagano prefecture. So, and we finally, I mean, to be honest, on a personal note, we found out the year before, we went through some personal things. My father passed away, and the same year, it was a tough year, 2015, we found out that we couldn't have kids. So we thought, come on, because we were, over the 10 years, we looked at lots of properties and we were still thinking, what should we do? Should we go for it, buying one of these houses and moving out to the countryside, or should we stay in Saitama and just, but then finding that out, and then my father passing away, so life's too short. Let's just do it. Let's even if we had kids, we would have done it probably, but that was kind of the push. So we yeah. So, late 2015, early 2016, we were looking very, very hard for a house. And we got this through, Maiko found it through the local government, the local council.
Yep.
Were sort of put this, we're advertising this house as for sale. We already wanted to move here. So we connected with them, and then they said, oh, yeah, and we know you want to get an old Japanese house. Here's one. What do you think?
Yep.
And we had very strict criteria for what we wanted. And this pretty much, ticked all the boxes.
Can you run me through those? Specifically, what were you after and what were you trying to avoid?
Can't even remember now. I think, I wanted a view without the bloody electric
power
poles.
lines. Tell me about it.
Yeah. And so that took a long time. There are, others available, and they're, friends of ours have got one as well. And other friends, but, that was one thing. We wanted some kind of view.
Yep.
And there are amazing, lots of houses of great views here.
Yeah.
It's amazing place for, the beauty of the valley. We wanted a nice neighbours. So when we were looking at it, our immediate neighbour, he was walking his dog and his wife came along as well, and they were so welcoming. We've become great friends, and they've been so helpful over the years. So we wanted great neighbours for, that's another thing.
So my experience of that, though, is that these are small communities. And I think that for these communities, everybody is an outsider. Doesn't matter if you're Japanese or foreigner. If you're from Tokyo, you're just as much an outsider.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say just as much, but you're an outsider.
Yeah.
Just like the foreigner. And I think it's all about the attitude that you bring. And so if you come in with the right attitude, I think they're very accepting because they know they need people to keep these communities growing.
Right.
And so I don't think it makes a big difference. And in a way, I think because you are so novel to them.
Right.
It's them. It sounds like I'm generalizing here a lot, but you are so novel. I think that they actually, in many regards, I think that it's a more open door than it might be for Japanese to make the transition from a big city into a small community like this.
As you said, it might be a combination of they feel they need us, but also they're just nice people.
But one of the reasons I think in these areas they are so accepting, especially the snow country areas, is because of the snow. You have to work as a community to survive here, and they rely on each other.
Yep.
And so as a result, I think if you come in with the right attitude, is my experience, I think you're going to be warmly welcomed. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why the community is so tight, because of the interdependence. It's tough here. Like last year in January, 2022, we were scared. That was the first time we were scared about the snow, and the neighbours, you could tell they were fearful, or not fearful, but they were concerned about if there's another day or another night of constant snow, maybe 2006 will happen again. And what happened in 2006 in Togari was the Japan National Defense helicopters were dropping food parcels in Togari because they were cut off for a week.
Do you know in 2006 how much snow they were experiencing?
Pete, I'd be, probably someone will call me out, but I heard it was something like 14 meters accumulated snow over the season. This range of mountains, which is to the west of Iyama, the Sekata mountain range, as I said, is kind of a huge. It's like a huge snowmaking machine. So the cold air from Siberia comes over the Sea of Japan, picks up that moisture, and then it comes and hits this barrier of mountains, and it's pushed up, and then just dumps this snow and over to where you mentioned as well, up in Niigata, because this goes all the way up there.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk to the really old timers up there in that area, they talk about skiing over these houses to go to school when they were kids.
Right.
And we're talking 2 or 3 story houses with their very steep pitched thatched roofs.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even guess how. Do you know how tall this house is?
No, I never thought about that actually. Yeah.
But you mean that's a hell of a lot of snow.
Right.
We're talking 4 to 5 meters at least.
Yeah. Oh, at least. Yeah. That's right. Amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. It must have been quite good fun, actually.
And this is part of the well, this is part of the reason, isn't it? That some people think you're absolutely nuts to want to live in these places, and they probably have a point,
right?
Because it's not easy, right? It's expensive to keep these places heated.
Yeah,
you're constantly outside having to dig yourself up. Yeah. But I think actually a bit of inconvenience in people's lives. It's actually kind of what we need in this modern world. I think it's the over-convenience of the modern world that gets people a bit disengaged with life.
Right.
You know, one thing I like about living up here is that it makes you very aware of the seasons. Do you find this?
Oh, yeah.
And that you start to notice things like the seasonal light changing, and that where winter's I always notice that winter's finishing, not because of the temperature or the snow, the light has changed.
Right.
And the light is coming that early spring, and then spring is changing into the summer light.
Yeah.
I would never notice that in a city.
Yeah, I think it is something we are missing. Now it's become of an old cliche, though. People saying, oh, yeah, we're because of social media and the way we live our lives and, you know, especially urban life, we're missing that contact with our primitive selves. And perhaps this is a negative thing, but it's become a bit of a cliche. But I do think my life and my wife's and my friends here, it's such a, what I would say is it's the variety of life here. And every day, you know, there's no drudgery. It's always, it's so, such a broad spectrum of different activities, you know, that's not available to us. I mean, that we have to get involved in the community, the clearing the snow, for example, the managing the rice field, looking after the garden, but I would say, going back to what I said about the community, that's the big thing. Yeah. You know, we're so busy. When we lived in Tokyo, we thought we were busy. And we moved here, and one of the reasons was to sort of escape the rat race, as it were, and actually going back to what I said at the beginning of the conversation, I don't like it when people say they're busy, but hectic. We're so much more
country hectic.
Our lives are just so hectic here.
In a healthy way, though. Right?
In a healthy way. Yeah. We don't complain. It's not stressful.
And that's what I love about these old houses, because I think it takes a real commitment. And probably, I imagine there's been moments when you've had this house and you thought, what am I doing? Why did we take on this house? Because they are literally living, breathing things, and you're going to be living and negotiating and working with this house for the rest of your life. Yeah. Right? Because it really does take effort to maintain them. Not only to maintain them, but you're going through the process of restoring one.
Right.
So I think actually I would like to jump onto that and talk specifically about your house. So why don't we just take a break and we'll come back in part 2 and talk about the renovation that you're doing here with your house in Togari.
Great.
Welcome back. I'm speaking with Rich Morgan, who's in the process of renovating a traditional building called a traditional farmhouse, referred to in Japan as a kominka in Togari, Nagano. Rich, you said you bought the house we're in 2016. Is that correct? 2016?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. What do you know of the history of the house? Like, how old is it, and who was living here prior to you guys taking it on?
So, when we bought it, we were told it was 200 years old. Mm-hmm. So now it's about 205, whatever. So to just explain what a kominka is, so to break it down, ko means old, min means folk or people, and ka is the kanji for house. Yep. It's a very nice looking kanji in the Japanese Chinese alphabet. It's very beautiful looking kanji actually, as a combination. And it means old people's house, but it doesn't mean that. It means a traditional farmhouse where a large family would have lived. Yep. And this piece of land has been lived on by the same family for generations. Yep. You know, we were told something in the region of 400 years.
Oh, really?
So there would have been previous incarnations of this house on this land before, which is I find fascinating. You know, God knows what's beneath our feet.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Because you mentioned that already. You were told it's 200 years, and everything is kind of estimates. No
one really knows how. Yeah. So it's been in that. It was in that family for many years, and then I think the remaining son who took over the house, he unfortunately passed away around 2010, and so it was not lived in for 5 or 6 years.
Yep.
And we bought it off his sister.
And so it was unoccupied when you bought
Yeah,
it, and
that's
it's been
right.
unoccupied for around 5 years.
5-6 years, yeah.
Which is an issue with these houses, right? Because they're all constructed of timber, paper, and earthen walls.
Yeah.
And so if they're not lived in, they degrade really quickly.
That's yes. Well, especially in these big snow areas, yeah, because then they will. Termite damage is a big problem. That's the number one problem. And then if you factor in the huge snows, putting weight on and then the thatch. Nobody has, unless there's something wrong with them, will have a thatch roof in this area because thatch is a nightmare for clearing snow off.
Yeah,
as we all us Minka lovers know.
Yeah.
So they've been, most of them, 99% of them, been covered with these metal roofs.
Yeah, which is the case with this house, right?
Yeah, and if they're not lived in, they get rusty, and the snow will just stick. So when we bought ours, and the first winter before it was painted, when we were up on the ski resort, it was easy to see our house because it was the one with all the bloody snow on it. It was like 1.5 meters of snow stuck on it, and we've all had that trouble when the other people who bought them. Once you get it painted, it slides off, and it's down. Like a beautifully designed way of just getting the snow off it, naturally.
So what was the condition of this house when you took it on?
That's a good question, yeah. So it was good condition in terms of damage. It was just a broken window. Yeah. And the neighbour, my lovely neighbour, who I have a bit of a bromance going with, he, as I mentioned earlier, he had just been clearing it while the person who lived here was in hospital. And then when he passed away, he carried on just making sure it was cleared, the snow around just to protect it. So we were lucky in that way. And, when we eventually started renovating it and getting underneath, there were a lot of dead animals because unfortunately they come in during the winter. Yeah. And a couple of seasons he hadn't cleared it. Right. And so they got stuck in there. Oh. And it's very sad. But there were a lot of skulls of it was like a zoo. The whole house, these Minka are like zoos. There's all kinds of animals living in them. So we like that.
It's a shared space.
I was on the phone with a client yesterday, and I could hear a little above my head. Wonder what that was. Probably some kind of But there was a snake I found last year on the sofa. Not the dangerous kind, just the.
There's only two types of snakes up here. It's worth mentioning. One's not dangerous. One is.
One is very dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah. So we got hold of it, and then the first year we used it as a beso, which means second home in Japanese, and we came up from Saitama every Friday, drove up. It was great actually. From work, I picked my wife up, and we drive straight up here. Get the music on. It was lovely, like escaping from the city. Then the Monday, 5 a.m., we get up and drive straight back. That was for the whole year. Yep. And then we finally moved December 2017 permanently.
And I imagine the first step of any renovation of one of these old houses is just pulling everything off it. Yeah. And to see what the reality is.
So,
there's the kind of first step?
I would say there are two kinds of these Minka. I'm going to keep referring to them as Minka. I hope everyone who's listening can now know what they are, these old farmhouses. There are two kinds. One is that was one type that hasn't really been touched and is maybe in a bit of a bad state, but just needs a good clean and is a blank canvas. And the other kind that was really, I would say, bastardized in the 60s, 70s, 80s by the families who were living in them, where they tried to modernize them. And as we know, the 70s wasn't a great time for interiors and it was very badly done. So when we bought this area we're sitting in now was completely different. It was just very low, horrible sort of vinyl ceilings, white vinyl, horrible composite material. And the floor was raised up 40 centimeters with a horrible fake wooden floor. And 3 or 4 separate rooms, disgusting bathroom and toilets. And, this separate room idea because of heat, because it gets cold around here, to save energy and whereas originally pre-war the first 150 years of its life, probably it was just 2 basic rooms. This big open room with the open ceiling with a huge fire and a horse and a goat living in the room.
Yep.
And a kitchen, a very basic kitchen area.
Earthen floor.
Earthen floor, that's right.
Yep.
A soil floor.
Yep.
And then on the other side, as you look at the house, normally on the right-hand side, as you look at the house, would have been the tatami area, the sleeping area, the natural straw bedding area. And that was it, really. Yeah, the first big job was putting the bathroom in and the toilets, because we needed those. And then the second phase, 2020, I had a good friend who's also a minka lover. He's got a beautiful minka up the road. I unfortunately slipped a disc in my back, and country life, lifting something and not bending my knees. Yeah. So he did a huge amount of the demolition, and he's a rock star. It was brilliant, and so ripped out all of this horrible 70s kitsch kind of material, and we, took it away, and then we were left with this basic shell. Yeah, and the walls had to be redone. Just the pillars were left and the main beams.
Yep.
All the solid walls you can see, apart from this original. We had to rebuild.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was a big project. We had a wonderful carpenter who helped us all the way, throughout the whole project. Yep.
Any big surprises along the way? I imagine that would be the first step, was kind of really seeing
so many.
What's underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
and nothing here is in straight lines, right? So.
Oh, there are absolutely no straight lines in this house. No. Right. And under the bedding, the sleeping area, it's quite high. It's about a 70 centimeters high sleeping area. Ours is quite high because they need the airflow, because behind us is a forest.
Yep.
So you often find these houses, they have quite a high, one side is raised, the sleeping area, to get airflow underneath. And also these to keep chickens under there as well, through the winter as well. We found a huge hole, and now we realize a lot of our friends have found them as well. There's a big hole dug into that over there, still there actually, where they stored potatoes, strangely. There are a lot of strange methods. For example, the washing up was... There's a pond behind the house where they had koi carp. When they washed their dishes, it was majority of what they ate was vegetable based. Yeah. No meat, not even much fish in this area. They would just wash the dishes with water. The grey water would go into the pond, and the koi would eat the bits of food left on the plates. Yeah, that would come off the plates. Yeah. It was a brilliant system, really. Yeah. So, but I do wonder what's in that. The bed What's the bed of that pond composed of?
Yeah. It's another example of just these houses really are living things in themselves. Yeah. And as you mentioned, you're sharing it. It's not just yours. There's all these other things that are reliant and living in and around the house. Yeah. Something which is a really wonderful thing. And one thing I like about the renovation that you're doing is that you really seem to be focused on retaining a lot of the actual character and history of the house, with the exposed earthen walls, showing things like this. I think a lot of renovations of these older houses are done very nicely, but I noticed that they seem to, maybe they cover it up a little bit better than they did in the 70s, but they often then cover up the bones of the house, and you guys seem to be leaving it very open. Well, it's a conscious decision? Or?
Yes, because what we wanted, because of Maiko's job, and we'll come to that later, is we wanted it as an experiment. This is a house. This is why it's not finished as well, unfortunately. But for good or for bad, we wanted to leave it as an experiment. So it's very open plan compared to, and again, I've got so much love and respect for my fellow minka lovers who've come here and done them up and bought them and, protecting them. Everyone's done them in a different way, which is great as well. But we wanted to do it a bit more bare bonesy. Yeah. So that we can experiment in the future. Yeah. But one thing I would say about minka as homes, they're very adaptable. We all wanted to stamp our own identity on them. I think that's the main point. Yeah. I think for this one, we wanted it really open. I love open plan. Yeah. We were aiming for a place where you can entertain people, and that's really what we were going for. But also we could actually put smaller rooms in. It's got that flexibility, but everyone else has got that as well. That's the great thing about minka. You can change things very easily compared to Western housing. Yeah. it's much more inflexible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's not yet finished, but in a way, I think it will never really be finished because that's not.
Yeah, it's called the Sagrada Familia amongst the neighbours. Some of the more cultured neighbours, they refer to it as because they just, one guy says, "Oh, his 5-year-old kid will probably be in university by the time it's finished."
But I think these houses, they're not meant to be. They're literally they're living. Right, and so I think there's always something there'll never come a day. I think would you agree that you can sit back and say, I don't need to do anything to this house anymore?
Oh, absolutely not,
because of everything we've spoken about.
Yeah,
they need to be maintained, and especially in this environment with the snow. There's never every winter. Obviously, if it's not winter where you're clearing the snow, it's getting ready for the winter and preparing the house for it.
Yeah.
And so the house is that real satellite in which you would survive the winter within the snow. And as a result, you need to give back to it and you've got to maintain it. So I think these houses are never really finished. No, if they are, maybe you've messed up the whole spirit of it.
And also I'd be very bored
if
I finished it. Yeah, and I'm not into we never really wanted to do it as we don't want to sell it. It's a place we want to settle because we've moved around so much all over the world.
In that regard, I mean, the reputation for these houses is they can be exceptionally cheap to buy sometimes, quite expensive to fix. In terms of your renovation, the budgeting has been roughly what you expected, or it's been a little bit, there's been some surprises?
Yeah, we're pleasantly surprised. We've undercut, our original target, and so we're very happy about that. But also, to be honest, as we were talking about earlier before this, compared to if you wanted to live in a ski resort in an old classic, 200-year-old house with all this space, with now we've got 1 hectare of land. A lot of that's farmland, so it can't officially be called private land. But you'd be looking at, how much are we talking in a ski resort in Europe or North America? So it's at a fraction of that to come and buy one of these houses and to have that land. You don't need, some people have gone the way of not having much land, and it's even cheaper. You're buying the land. You're not buying, the house is worth nothing. Actually, to the Japanese.
The land is worth less because the house is on it.
Exactly. So talking of that, what you know about that. Yeah. So if you keep a house, an abandoned house on the land, you pay less tax, actually. But that's one thing that's causing a problem. That's why we have so many empty houses around, because parents unfortunately are passing away, and then their kids have already moved to the cities. They don't want to come back, so they leave the house on the land so therefore they pay less tax. But also, the having a house, you've got to knock it down. And as we said earlier, the Japanese don't really appreciate them, so they will want to knock it down. So we were so pleased that the previous owner, we thanked. I was almost on bended knee, saying thank you for not knocking it down.
Do you know what this house, the majority of the timber in this house is it one type of wood or different types of wood?
Good question. So one thing you notice about Minka in these snow country areas is the pillars that hold up the house are much thicker than, say, down in Kyushu or the warmer climates of Western Japan, because of the weight of the snow on the roof. So they need to be thicker. And also a wood that they were very fond of using, the carpenters 200 years ago, was keaki, which is zelkova in English. And it's indigenous tree to Taiwan and Japan. And it's incredibly strong, very hard wood. And it was very popular to use in making these, especially for the pillars and the cross, some of the cross beams as well. But most of the upper areas, the rafters are cedar, cedar trees, because they're lighter but also very strong. Yeah.
How hard is it to find the work or the people with the skills to actually restore these houses? I mean, the carpentry must be a nightmare.
Yeah, it's very sad because those carpenters, most of them have died out, but there's still some people keeping those skills alive. And they're not just, you would expect them to be mostly non-Japanese people, but there are some great, legendary Japanese carpenters who are skilled in Japanese joinery. And when I say joinery, I mean in these houses they didn't use any metal in terms of pegs or screws. It was all Japanese all wooden pegs or joinery, and everything fitted together, and also to flex in earthquakes. It's all beautifully designed if you look up in the rafters. But a lot of that is kept alive, and thankfully by the people who maintain temples and shrines.
What's the next stage of the renovation? What comes next?
So the in the 70s, the previous owners also covered the exterior wall with this horrible aluminium siding, and you see it around a lot actually.
Yeah.
And so we're in the process of ripping that off and recladding it with it. It was originally one of our other neighbors is 93, and he remembers it just before the war as a little kid. He remembers that it was covered with the bark of cedar trees, which I've actually recreated up there on the ceiling. So the whole house was covered in that. Yeah.
Do you know why? What the purpose of it?
I think it's because it looks nice.
That's it.
No, I don't know, actually. That's a very good question.
Oh.
Specifically why? Maybe because you don't see...
So rarely in Japan is it because it just looks nice.
No, okay, yeah.
They take very practical things and make them look nice.
But maybe it was 200 years ago. Maybe they were more into aesthetics 200 years ago than they are now. But that's another story. That's another podcast.
Yeah.
That's too massive, that subject. I think if you look at a tree, I suppose the snow doesn't stick to it.
The bark's there for a reason.
The bark, yeah, exactly.
Makes sense, actually, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd maybe recreate that in the future, but what we've done for the moment is a horizontal siding, which was also used in other parts of the house. So, yeah.
And very tantalisingly, you mentioned to me before we started recording that there is the potential of a hidden or a missing sword somewhere in this house. That's pretty fascinating.
I tell everyone that, but I don't know if it's true. But basically, at the end of the Second World War, MacArthur and his cronies asked everyone to hand the Japanese to hand in the family katana, the family sword. Most families had a sword in the family, as an heirloom. Yep. And they'd asked them to hand them in because, of course, they're worried about some kind of uprising. The Japanese are too polite for an uprising, though.
Oh, I don't know. If you read Japanese history,
yeah, I know. I'm being sarcastic, but so a lot of. But you were saying that 3 million were handed in.
I read recently, that 3 million were taken out of Japan during the occupation, mostly by US occupying troops. They would just buy them or give them away. And they were taken. Yeah, so and as you said yourself, the biggest market for it in the world is the United States
US for katana. Yeah. To avoid handing them in, a lot of families, if they had one of these big farmhouses, they'd hide the sword in the rafters in one of the difficult to reach rooms on the second floor, which is where they were making silk. A lot of these houses, they made silk on the second floor. We found a lot of silkworm chrysalis up on the second floor, But I've been looking for that sword. There's one area that I haven't managed to explore yet, so I'm still looking. And the previous owner, she said it's still here, but I don't know. I think it's just probably that's probably in her sales pitch when she tried to sell it, when she was selling it to us.
One thing I want to touch on before we wrap up the interview is you mentioned that this house is not just your home, but it's also a project of your wife, Maiko. Yes. And can we talk a little bit then as to actually specifically what does she do in terms of her work and how does the house kind of relate to that?
Well, I think she's quite a unusual person, and as I mentioned earlier, but she from the age of 10, she had a dream to work in international development and also to become an architect. So she's done the former. She worked in Honduras for some years. For the Japanese government for JICA, and she maybe becoming an architect might be a bit of a stretch, but she's always been interested. She's a project manager, so she's used those skills to realize her dream of renovating these houses and the barns I mentioned as well. She and she works with an amazing carpenter, construction firm who specialize in renovating these buildings. And also, if for whatever reason one of these houses, as you mentioned, you spoke to somebody who wanted to keep the house and not knock it down. If they do need to be knocked down, if they're damaged by snow, or if for some reason the owner says it's got to be knocked down, there's no other way, then this company will take the beams and any of the features of the house, store them, and then use those in building new houses or hotels in the ski resorts here, or apartments in the ski resorts. So she's helping with that. Right. She's learning a lot. She's not a carpenter or architect by experience, but she's helping with the clients as an intermediary with the builder. And so she loves it. Yeah, she's really enjoying it.
So if somebody were looking to find a kominka or to renovate a kominka in this area, that's a company that they could be in contact with her through that company, and it's something they can assist with?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of ways of getting them. That's not the only way. As we said, sometimes the best way is just to get to know somebody in the local community, and that takes time. Yeah, there's lots of different ways of doing it.
The name of the company?
The name of that company is Sachiya. And Sachi, that translates as happy house, I believe.
Right.
And she's in that project. She's collaborating with local craftsmen, people who are experts in these houses, and also real estate agent, and so. But it's a passion project for her. Yeah.
What I'll do for anyone who's interested, I'll include in the show notes for this episode, I'll include a link to the website, just have a look, get a sense of what's happening up here, because I think, I really admire anyone who takes on these houses with the passion. And speaking of words, you mentioned you don't like the people who describe themselves as busy. I think the word passion is used way too much.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But it does take that, literal passion to actually undertake these houses and restore them in the way that you're doing. So I really admire you for that. But the fact that also it extends to a broader approach to actually assisting the community. And
maybe passion,
finding more people to come in is a fantastic thing.
Perhaps passion is the wrong word. Weirdness might be better. Yeah, that's what's required. You can't be. I don't think any of us are normal. We're not like I suppose we don't like the drudgery of Tokyo life. We kind of got tired of it, and we appreciate aesthetics. I mean, we're not saying we're better than we appreciate. You're not like. I suppose we could be called old romantics, but we're not saying we're better than anyone who doesn't appreciate these old houses, but we like them.
But here's the key, because one thing I really respect about you, Rich, is you do meet some people who maybe have come out to these areas, done something similar, and then they're very protective of what they have. They don't want anyone else coming up. They've got their little sweet spot. I don't think that's you. You seem to be someone who really wants other people to come in, find other places, do them up, and really help rebuild these places into the communities that they once were.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fantastic thing. And it's part of the point of me launching this podcast is exactly that, to help others discover, what we've discovered up here,
right?
And hopefully, find their way up here as well.
Yeah. That sounds like a plan. Can I say one more thing?
Go for it.
Well, as we sit here and talk, what one thing I've noticed about our Minka and everyone else's Minka is, and we mentioned all the stuff that could be below us, after the family living for all those years, and children visiting and the neighbors coming over centuries, literally. Isn't it amazing to think of all the conversations and dramas that have happened, in this building? And that's why I really think they deserve protecting. It's not just about the building, the pillars, the trees that have been used to make them. It's about the memories, and the stories. And that's what we need to cherish and protect.
That's a great place to end the interview. Rich, really appreciate your time today. As I mentioned, this is only the second episode of the podcast. If you're open to the idea, I hope maybe in the future I can come back and we can chat again. I think there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. Loved it. It's been great fun, and thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
So that's it for today. A very big thank you to Rich for welcoming me into his home and making time to chat. I have no doubt we'll find a reason to chat again on this podcast. Also, a very big thank you to Maiko, who couldn't join us on the day, but had planned to be there. Maiko, I hope I've done your story justice. As mentioned, you can find the Sachiya website in the show notes for today's episode. The podcast website is www.snowcountryforoldmen.com. Make sure to subscribe to, rate and review the podcast, and follow us on Instagram at Snow Country for Old Men, Twitter at Snow Country Pod, and Facebook Snow Country for Old Men. Playing out today's show, as they will continue to do so in future episodes, is the local taiko group Izuna Gongen Daiko. And in tomorrow's episode, I'll actually be speaking with one of the key members of that group and composer of this piece, Komatsu Haruna, about taiko, tengu. Tengu is a supernatural creature that is said to lurk in the forest of her home of Izuna, and her own story. I'll see you then. Bye for now.